Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever and wherever you're watching this, and welcome to LifePoint Community Church's online service. So, for the past few weeks, we've been working our way through a really depressing and difficult part of the Bible called the Book of Ecclesiastes. It's not difficult in the sense that it's hard to understand, but difficult in the sense that it's bleak, cynical, and pessimistic. And of course, all that gloomy negativity stands in stark contrast to the sort of comfort and hope that we are perhaps looking for when we come to church and open the Bible. In this morning's text, you'll be glad to know that it's pretty much the same. But as you know, if you've been watching the past couple of weeks, that even through this dark, gloomy, and depressing text, we do find a life that is certainly worth living. And that's my hope for you as we go through this part of the Bible, that we do see how this can actually help us learn how to live in a rhythm of work, play, rest, and worship. So let's get started this morning. We're going to be looking at chapter 7 as we learn this morning. Verse 1. A good name is better than fine perfume. Now, when this sentence talks about fine perfume, it's not talking about something that smells nice. It's talking about something that costs a lot of money. So perfume was one of the ancient world's luxury products. In the same way that, I don't know, Jimmy Choo or a Lamborghini would be a luxury product in today's world. So, in other words, this is talking about something that very few could afford. And so, when the writer says that a good name is better than fine perfume, what he is saying, or what he's offering, is consolation to those of us, which is most of us, who are not able to indulge in life's luxuries. He's saying, hey, I know your story, and I know that you work really hard just to get by. There's bills to pay, mouths to feed, and it's a worry, and sometimes it's a struggle. But I also know that you are a good person with a good character and a great reputation. And so the simple wisdom offered here is that being a good person with a good character is of more value than money. So if there is an ethical instruction here, it would be something along the lines of doing the right thing in life is more important than making it in life. And that is the instruction that we are pretty comfortable with. This is a classic piece of biblical wisdom. It's very agreeable. And this is the sort of thing that we expect the Bible to say. And so at this point, we are amendable. And if we heard these words when they were first spoken, I think we'd be nodding our heads in agreement, right? However, of course, there's a twist to this. Because in the next part of this verse, we read this: and the day of death better than the day of birth. Really? I mean, what does that even mean? And how does that fit into what the writer just said? Because if death is better than life, then what is the point to live a good life with a good name? It doesn't make any sense. Because if you follow the morality of the first half of this sentence, the day of your birth places you in a world where it's incumbent upon you to be a good person of good character and a good reputation. But none of that seems to matter because death is better. And if death is better, then why live? And why live morally? Verse 2 says, it is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting. Now, I've been to a funeral home or two in my day, and it won't surprise you to know also that I've had my share of parties. And so, in my opinion, this sentence is completely wrong. In my view, having a good night with good music, good food, good drink, and good company is slightly more fun than going to a funeral home. But for this teacher, the funeral home is better. He says, "For death is the destiny of everyone. Therefore, the living should take this to heart." Now, growing up in Australia, we went to the beach a lot and we used to build sand castles. Now, sometimes we would build the most elaborate castle with fine details. But very soon, as soon as we were finished the sandcastle, the waves would come crashing in and wipe our sandcastles away. Well, the worldview of Ecclesiastes is that we are all playing in the sand. We are building our lives, some meticulously and some not so meticulously, on the shores of an immense ocean. Every relationship that we build, every injury that we carry, every injustice that we suffer, every lie that we tell, every comfort that we acquire, in the end, it all disappears. And this, the teacher says, is what the living should take to heart. They should take to heart that everything will one day become nothing. And therefore, nothing that they are doing has any meaning. Verse 3, frustration is better than laughter, because a sad face is good for the heart. Now, again, when I read this, I'm like, sorry, but I don't agree. Because I've been to comedy nights. I love watching comedy on TV. And in my experience, having a laugh is actually good for you. Furthermore, that's kind of what the Bible says. For example, in the book of Proverbs, which is the traditional comfortable wisdom bit of the Bible, it says, "A happy heart makes the face cheerful, but heartache crushes the spirit." And so, my view is that laughter is preferable to frustration and not the other way around. So, what the teacher's saying is that if you walk around all day being sad and depressed and upset about your life, that's okay, because despondency is good for you. So, in this train of thought, sad is happy, misery is pleasure, down is up. What is this? It's ludicrous. And the ludicrous of this raises a question. Think about it. If I am a Bible teacher, why would I deliberately be ludicrous? Why would I deliberately say something that makes very little sense? I think only one reason. I want to make fun of those who think that anything makes any sense. There are parts of the Bible that are, for lack of a better phrase, simplistic wisdom. For example, have a look at this. This is from the wisdom part of the Bible, the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 10, verse 4. It says, "Lazy hands make a man poor, but diligent hands brings wealth." Fair enough. Let's take a look at this one. "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." So it's simple, it's neat, it makes sense. But for the teacher of Ecclesiastes, it's too neat, it's too simple. And so when he says, "Hey, let me tell you a simple little proverb, frustration is better than laughter because a sad face is good for the heart," it doesn't make any sense. Exactly. None of it makes any sense. None of those simple catchphrases and neat proverbs can accurately reflect the contradictions and complications of life and faith. Then the writer or the teacher says in the next verse, it is better to heed the rebuke of a wise person than to listen to the song of fools. Like the crackling of thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of fools. Now, in the traditional wisdom parts of the Bible, such as those I just read to you, this business of heeding the rebuke of the wise is a recurring one, and it makes perfect sense. After all, if you're misbehaving, it's good to be told off by someone who is older and wiser than you rather than listening to the advice of an idiot. So when you read this, you may say, okay, this makes sense. But the teacher just can't let it go. Just when his readers think that he is veering back into orthodoxy, he then says that this too is meaningless. So, in other words, whether you follow good advice or bad advice, whether you are careful with the company you keep or careless, whether you get every move right or every move wrong, it doesn't matter because it's all meaningless. Everything is just sandcastles built on the shorelines of an ocean. Verse 10 says, "Do not say, 'Why were the old days better than these?' For it is not wise to ask such questions." So when the writer talks about the old days, he's talking about the wisdom that was written in the old days. So in a country like ancient Israel, the people would periodically gather together, much like what we do on a Sunday morning for church. And they would be given information and instruction that dead people had written long ago of this information and instruction. It was therefore venerated or regarded with respect. But for this teacher, it is nothing more than intellectual laziness. If you say that you are only going to believe the things that your parents taught you, well, that's up to you. But surely it would not do you any harm to think for yourself. I mean, if everyone were too lazy to move beyond the wisdom of the old days, our species would never have moved from beyond hunting and gathering. So, what the teacher is saying here is that you have to think. You have to think. And in that thinking, you should not be bound to the wisdom of the past. And for we who are Christian and who try to live by an ancient wisdom, that's a disconcerting thought. It makes you wonder where this is going. Let's find out. Verse 11 says, "Wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing and benefits those who see the sun. Wisdom is a shelter as money is a shelter. But the advantage of knowledge is this: wisdom preserves those who have it." Cool. So this is like what parents would teach to their children or what preachers would give to their congregations. The irrefutable logic of character consequence. If you are wise, then you will know how to live. And if you know how to live, then you will live well. So be wise, work hard, take care of your family, pay your bills, read your Bible, say your prayers, and life will go well. And then as soon as he says something that we can agree with, the writer then says, "Consider what God has done. Who can straighten what he has made crooked?" Now, when a person such as myself, in a context such as this, says, "Consider what God has done," you may expect what you're about to be asked to consider is something beautiful, like how beautiful a butterfly was created. That design is reflective of how good and loving God is. Makes sense. But what about the lower worm? What about the fact that this is a parasite worm found in Africa. And what it does is it burrows into the eyes of children, turning them slowly blind. What does that say about God? You see, you can't have it both ways. If you accept the premise that there is a God, then you have to then arrive at the conclusion that God made some pretty bent and twisted stuff. And so the moral conundrum is that if God has made stuff crooked, then what's the point of trying so hard to fly so straight? Verse 14, when times are good, be happy. But when times are sad or bad, consider this: God has made the one as well as the other. Ouch. That is the most unwelcomed piece of honesty. So unwelcome that we tend not to go there. We're perfectly happy to thank God for our good blessings, but slightly more hesitant at blaming him for our misfortune. However, the teacher of Ecclesiastes has a worldview that allows no such convenience. He believes in God. He believes in God of the Bible. He believes that the God who is the very art or act of creation permitted the circumstances in which misfortune might not just exist, but flourish. This teacher is urging its students to stop being naive and get it into their heads that in the life that God has given us, in this world that He has made, good things happen and bad things happen. Therefore, no one can discover anything about their future. Now, when he talks about the future, what he means is the future that you think you can influence by applying the logic of character consequence. He's saying, I know that when we were little, your mother told you that you were a good person who did good things and followed good advice, that would lead to a good life. But the writer says, I need you to grow up now. I need you to understand that the world that God has made is twisted. And in its twisted, stuff just happens. And there is nothing you can do about it. Now, this, of course, raises a deeply troubling question. If being good does not necessarily lead to a good life, then why bother being good? The question is articulated well in the next verse. In this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these, the righteous perishing in their righteousness and the wicked living long in their wickedness. So in the Bible, as I said, there is a concept of character consequence. In other words, if you are a good person, if you do your utmost to do the right thing, then you will live a good life. However, if you're a bad person, if you do bad things, then you will have a bad life. And what the teacher is saying here is that in his experience, this is observably untrue. So students, says the teacher, as you are thinking about the consequences of your character, consider this. Bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people. That's life. And if that's life, then the question becomes, well, how should I live? His advice at this point becomes shocking when he says this. Sorry. Do not be over righteous, neither be over wise. Why destroy yourself? Do not be over wicked. Do not be a fool. Why die before your time? In other words, we ought to be modest in both our sin and our religion. He's saying, fair enough, don't go crazy with destructive habits because they do not tend to be destructive. But on the other hand, don't take this whole God, morality, faith thing too seriously either, because that will get you into trouble as well. Now, the reason he talks like this is because he believes that large parts of the wisdom that you read in the Bible, wisdom that people are hanging on to, are just incorrect and not helpful. There is no simple relationship between character and consequence that we can extrapolate a moral code from. It sounds good. It makes perfect sense in Sunday school when you're talking to children. But the cold reality of life is that stuff just happens. Good stuff, bad stuff. And there is no rhyme or reason why. It's all just meaningless. Now, if life is meaningless and complicated and contradictory, then what should we do tonight? The teacher of this book has no interest in wiping the tears from your eyes or the lines of your face. His interest is in making you aware of how the meaninglessness of life fills this and every moment with extraordinary meaning. There's an old movie called 127 Hours. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's a true story about a young adventurer called Aaron Ralston, who gets himself trapped in the walls of a remote canyon in Utah. A boulder pins his arm against the wall of the canyon, and when this happens, he does what any of us would do when he cries for help. But because of the remoteness of this location, nobody comes. And then he gets out his pocket knife and he tries to chip away at the boulder. And that doesn't work. So he just stays there. After a few days, he realizes that he is going to die. And he really does not want to die. So at this point, he decides to break his arm. And then with his little knife, he cuts through the skin and muscle and flesh. And with one arm, he climbs out of the canyon and makes his way to safety. And the tagline of the story is that there is nothing more powerful than the will to live. Humans who love to live will do almost anything to stay alive. We'll have surgery. We'll go through chemotherapy. We'll have transplants. We'll do anything and everything to live, and because we love to live. And I point out that because of this part of the Bible, with its cynicism and obsession with death, seems rather morbid. But there is a point to all of this. When you wake up to the fact that something is temporary and pointless, it instantly becomes full of meaning and wonder. You don't get to play in the sand for long, and you cannot afford to waste a single day not being enchanted by the miracle of life, not being enthralled with the fact that you are not dead, but in fact, you are very alive. Hear the wisdom of the teacher. Death is the destiny of everyone, and the living should take this to heart. This is the call to celebrate every moment that we have in the sand, to bring an awareness to every moment that a day is coming that you will not have such a moment. And so today, this week, I invite you to be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of the people in your life. Be aware that you get to build sandcastles in the sand and be grateful for the life that you get to live. We're going to be talking more about this next week. But in the meantime, God bless you, and may the God encourage you with his wisdom, with his grace, with his love today and forevermore. Amen. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week. Take care.